Good afternoon. I'm Janet Sun with Experience, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on employment and recruiting trends for 2012 and beyond. Experience is pleased to be hosting today's session for schools and employers because we firmly believe in knowledge sharing and best practices as the best way to move our career services and recruiting industry and profession forward to the benefit of all students. For those of you who are new to Experience, we've been providing Career Center management systems to colleges and universities for over 16 years, helping schools manage their campus recruitment programs. We also help employers connect with entry-level talent. We recently joined forces with Connect EDU, a leader in education and career planning, to bring together the full spectrum of capabilities for higher ed institutions. By working together, we see the opportunity for career services to play a more influential role on campus by connecting the dots between enrollment management, student retention, academic, and careers. We also see the opportunity to help employers find talent in colleges and high schools. Combined, we now have 3,000 colleges and high school organizations, 20 million students, and 130,000 employers. For schools, here's what's new at Experience. We've added many new services to enable career centers to achieve positive outcomes with students. Here are some examples of some of the new services that we've added. Appointment scheduling, event tracking, LinkedIn discussions and professional contacts, content plugin with fresh articles on entry-level career search, and our integrated resume builder. And the recent refresh of our public login page has significantly boosted student traffic at our schools. For employers, please continue to post to your school partners often and many, and sign up for campus career fairs, which are in full swing. We also assist employers in need of entry-level talent through specialized recruitment and branding solutions. And through our merger with Connect EDU, we're now able to help employers reach high school students as well, to build STEM talent pipelines or for training and other certification programs. At this time, I would like to introduce our speaker and good friend, Dr. Phil Gardner. Dr. Gardner and I have been working together for nearly a decade, and whenever I talk with him, I always learn something. As director of the Collegiate Employment Research Institute, Dr. Gardner focuses his research in areas of transition from college to work, early socialization, and career progression in the workplace, workforce readiness, and other areas related to college student studies. MSU's nationally recognized annual college labor market study, Recruiting Trends, which we'll hear about today, is completed under his direction each fall. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Phil Gardner.
I am delighted to be with everybody today. It's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk to people about young adults. The slide that's up on your screen is kind of the intro, and what I've done is change my slide last night based on there were some pre-submitted questions, and so what I tried to do is work in a number of those into the presentation, and then when I address those questions, they're marked by a star. And if there's a smiley face, that means that there is a research brief that we've already published, and if you go to our website, you can pull it down and refer to that. And if there's a sun kind of image, that means that we've got reports coming out over the next several months that's going to cover that topic more in depth than I'm going to do today. The PowerPoint is available, and there is already a basic recruiting trend PowerPoint on our website. This one will be made available, and there is audio for that. So let me start. Advance the slides. Slides aren't advancing. You're going to have to advance the slides. They're not advancing from my machine. Okay, this is, I want to recap and start and give some context for this presentation by looking at what happened, what's not currently happening, but what happened last year. And this is kind of the image, some of you may remember that if you saw me last year, this is the image I used of what the college labor market looked like last year. Average-wise, we were going to have a 10% growth in bachelor level specifically. The rest of the degrees were kind of up and down, but bachelors are going to go up solidly at 10%. But what we had in that group, what we had happening was two groups were significantly pulled away from everybody else. They were outliers. They were recruiting aggressively and fast. You could see the rest of the employers were basically still on the bottom, and there was no coattails on this particular group pulling them. And what happened was that the two groups really distorted the average because we had two groups that were very, very aggressive, and they were out there. And if let me just summarize then and show you what happened last year. In advance slides. So last year, so starting in the fall of 2010, it got off to a very fast and aggressive start. We had a number of very large employers that had been on the sidelines for a large part of the decade, hiring a few people, come in aggressively to start hiring. And we also had a number of small, fast growth companies that were also very aggressive, and they came off, given that there was some positive information in the early fall, and so that triggered a lot of activity. Now, there was still a high level of uncertainty, so there were a lot of people sitting on the bench waiting to see what happened. The interesting thing about hiring in 2010-11 was much of the full-time hiring was done by the end of the fall or by the end of the Christmas holiday or the holidays. There was not a lot of companies anticipating coming back in the fall, particularly thing at their targets. But what happened is that near the end of the first semester in November, the economy went into a swoon. And in particular, manufacturing, which had been pretty aggressive because they'd come off some early indications that the production was going to turn around. Some of those companies took it on the ear and had to really pull back significantly in the spring. Now, they honored their hiring, but they just didn't fill. And when the economy swooned, the people that were there for uncertainty just didn't do a lot of hiring. So in spring, we really saw a slowdown in full-time hiring. It kind of petered out after January, and we didn't see very much. The but what we didn't expect to any great extent was the heavy focus on internship hiring that began in January. I mean, I was seeing data from schools that were seeing recruiting for internships up 300%. This was unexpected. I think it bodes well for the future if employers are that aggressive. But that's what summarized a year ago. So what happened was we had a labor market that on average looked is going to be very aggressive and very positive, but it was dominated by a few. So it didn't have a lot of depth to it, and it didn't have a lot of legs. It wasn't pulling anybody else with it. So that's where we were in May of 2012 as we got ready for this year. So now what we're seeing is we go into the 2011 year in a global sense, and we've had most of it's been in the U.S. has still been politically dominated rhetoric, and it really hasn't addressed the basic issues that we're dealing with regard to the underlying structure of the economy. And I'm going to talk more about that later. But we weren't getting a lot of traction in the economy early on in the year, and we then were faced with while the U.S. economy has been stabilized a bit and is at least moving forward, the rest of the world was in problems. Of course, everybody's aware of the problems in Europe, and it's past a slippery slope. Every time we think there's some resolution to that, then there's backsliding. So, and austerity's coming with some tremendous amount of pain that a lot of these countries may not be able to withstand. I mean, Greece is still having problems this morning, and so we don't know what the outcome is at. But Europe in austerity does affect the U.S. in a number of ways. They are a trading partner, but our banks are heavily exposed to European debt. So that just slows down the financial institutions. On the other hand, on the other side, in China, they're trying to cool down their economy. Their inflation is significant. So they put a lot of cost controls in. It's costlier to do business there. Wages continue to escalate for elite skilled labor, and it's significant. They raised the minimum wage laws, and everything there is making it more costly to do business, and that will begin to have a pronounced effect on labor allocations probably in the next 3 years, and we'll talk about that again. The real problem with the labor market has no pizzazz, and while each side of the political spectrum has tried to advocate for its levers, those were levers that worked, in old types of recessions and old depressions. And Robert Samuelson has written a nice article in Wilson Quarterly and other places about what's really going on and why we're not going to see any of these levers really work, because we have some underlying fundamental problems. In the Great Depression, it was moving off the gold standard and in the psychology of the gold standard for most countries, and it wasn't until we moved off the gold standard that freed up finances that actually brought an end to the Depression, which was kind of masked by a war. But that's context. Today, it's the social, the debt levels that are tied to specific programs that people are emotionally attached to, and since with all that emotion, it's been very difficult. And so the economy isn't going to move strongly forward until we get past that, and that's going to be hard. And that, in a sense, is what's happening. Now, whoops, I want to go back. That was something happened there. Okay, now, going into the fall of 2011, as this academic year started, we saw some very similar themes from that appeared the year before. We saw an improving labor market. And we began to gather more strength in September and October and November. We saw consumer spending rise and be fairly consistent. We saw a pretty good Christmas. Most of the spending they had to pull out, consumers pulled out of savings. They've had to change their spending habits. Again, we'll refer to more about consumers when we look ahead, but a significant portion of the U.S. economy depends on consumer spending. And when we don't have, as consumers, we don't have a pot of money to pull from to spend, we really have to watch what we spend. We kind of spread it out. There was a lot of Christmas spending that was just waited to the end of the year to come and happen, and then they aren't spending again. We're getting better growth than expected. It's still not close to 3%, that magic number that kind of reduces, generates more jobs, and we get to have the unemployment rate go down. We'd be a lot closer to 3% if Europe wasn't in such a problem. It's probably keeping us down by a half percentage point. But what's happened here is that this growth is probably not indicative of what's going to happen in the labor market. There's no guarantee anymore once we go by past 3% in growth that it's going to generate a lot of jobs. And as we're going to talk about, we're talking about college jobs, we're talking about new college hires, so that's a very small segment of the total labor market, and it can act very, very different than the labor market as a whole, and it actually is. So there are signs of hope. We didn't see a swoon. We've seen a much longer sustained good numbers in terms of jobs continue to be expanding, and they're adding jobs. There seems to be a lot of jobs that are unfilled, and we'll talk about that later. But just don't get too attached to the growth as a magic number that we're going to get a lot of jobs. The people that will affect the most will be unskilled labor that's been thrown out of construction and other places, and it probably will have little to do with college labor in the near future, mainly because we'll see that college labor right now is being framed, and the pace of it is being dictated by possible retirement. So let me find out why this. Okay. Now, this particular slide just summarizes a lot of what we want to talk about today, and that is the college labor market. And we break it out by degree level. Now, I have over 4,000 employers responded this year. Most of them get complete data. It does vary by degree level. The ones we want to focus on are the main one we want to focus on, and the strongest one is bachelor's. We have it up about 7% over the year, a little bit less than last year. The actual number of average hires per that it's expected at 26 is pretty similar to last year. You wouldn't think it was a 7% increase, but remember last year they had very high expectations. A lot of companies didn't meet those expectations, and so they had to drop down because the economy changed. MBAs are looking good, but there's some underlying structural problems there. No change for associate's degrees is pretty good, mainly because so many of those graduates are tied into regional and local labor markets, and they tend to be on technical sides, and the small medium companies are still hurting a little bit, and so there hasn't been as rapid expansion out. We'll continue to see some improvement in associate labor markets in areas that we have automobile production. They're tied to automobile production because that's expanding, and second and third tier suppliers are coming back on board, and it's the second and third tier tires that are heavily in the associate's degrees. Masters is essentially not unchanged from last year. That minus 1% is not significantly different. They're just kind of muddling through. I am, again, still exploring this regionally and by different types of majors. Accounting has improved, and there's a lot of accounting here. And health has improved, so I'm not quite sure yet why there hasn't been a stronger takeoff at the master's level. We picked up a lot more PhDs than we have in the past, due to a lot more startup and fast growth companies that are tied to scientific research and other kinds of consulting that use PhDs, and that's been a stable number. Professional is up because of healthcare. I will tell you now, when we talk about professional services, it's down because law is still ugly, which I'll talk about in a minute. There was a number of questions asked about the two-year college programs and how well they're doing. We have information from this year, and a little bit that I'm presenting here is just a touch of what we have. If you want a good picture of last year, last year we have a special two-year college report that's already available online, and we will write one this year. For those people that are in two-year colleges in the audience, I'll just put in, we do need more support from two-year colleges in helping get employers that hire two-year graduates. I lost a number of two-year schools from this year that I had last year, particularly in the Northeast and the South. So if there are schools out there that want to participate, you can email me. But this is a benchmark. We're seeing a pretty strong, stable labor market across the board. It's nothing flashy, but it's pretty stable. Okay, we have some issues out there, and I just don't want to dwell on these, but if you go out on YouTube and stuff, you'll see a lot of whiners, particularly in the MBAs. The law students are in a separate class, but also in desperate straits. The reason if you're dealing with MBAs, either your employer hiring MBAs, and you see a lot of this, but if you're on the college side and have MBAs, the market's up 6%. We've seen growth, but the supply of MBAs coming out of schools is far outstrips the demand. And the hierarchy at MBAs is that if you're at an elite, top-ranked MBA school, you probably don't have any problems. It's still not real positive, but those students are going to be picked up. And if they're in MBA, somebody graduating MBA that's already working in a company, that's not a problem. What we have are a lot of undergraduates who went directly to a variety of MBA schools. They're all over the place, everywhere, and they've gotten MBAs, and now they're coming out and seeking to be employed as MBAs with very little experience and not much more than what they had when they came in as BAs, except a lot of debt. And employers just haven't been willing. Everywhere I go, they keep same thing. I'm just not going to hire these people. They don't have the experience. I'm not going to hire them at the expectations they have. And the salaries aren't moving a lot. I mean, most of the national reports and MBA salaries come from the very top schools, and they're very distorted. So when you look across thousands of employers that from small to large, you can see that the salaries are not really going, and that's because the supply is so large. There's not a compelling move to move those out. The law situation is serious. We're seeing a loss of about a third of the law jobs. They will not come back. Most of this has been technology software-driven losses, and so they're not coming back. They're going to have to recreate new jobs for law students. Unfortunately, we're putting out more and more law students every year. Instead of reducing seats, law schools are expanding seats, and this is a serious problem. Everywhere I go, a lot of the students that attend my talks are law students that just can't break in anywhere and are working in Starbucks and others and owing $100,000 plus in debt. So these are two problem areas beyond the bachelor's that people need to be aware of. Now, the nice thing about this whole scenario, and if you look at the annual report, is that it's very consistent. I mean, when we went in and we start looking at size, it came out pretty much as we expected. The small businesses, those from 100 to 500, have been very cautious. Their hiring's up slightly, but they're very cautious, and that was predicted by the Office Depot Small Business Index. It said, compared to 2011 or 10, where small employers were a little exuberant, they're more cautious now. They got over jubilant, and then the economy fell back, so they're working for more certainty. And I think as the economy progresses and it stays on track, it is, even though it's not spectacular, these small employers will come off the fence. The fast growth, those from 9 to 100 employees, they're second stage growth companies, and large employers are very strong in this labor market. The medium-sized or mid-sized companies, 500 to 4,000, it's much better than we've ever seen it here, even though the overall number looks down a little bit. But we've seen the mid-tier companies come back and are starting to recover, particularly in the for-profit sector. As the larger companies gain momentum, they're bringing these medium companies along. Where we have concern is, and what's causing this size of organization to go down, is in government sector. And there's a number of states that are, and you look at non-federal government hiring, and it's down significantly, and it's mostly in this size of organization. Economic sectors, you'll see a little bit more of this in a minute, but I've never seen such consistency over across all economic sectors. Every one of them were positive. Manufacturing was down just a teeny bit, but the news since we did the report, I think they're back on track. I've seen more of them coming in this winter than they anticipated. So all sectors are in play here. All sectors are adding talent. All sectors are adding different mix of talent. I've never seen a study also in the 15, 18 years I've done this where every major has opportunities. I mean, and this is not one where it's just, we're going to see a lot of engineers and computer science, but there are opportunities for all majors. You also have to put in this caveat that we still don't have enough jobs to cover everybody, and so those students that are going to be less prepared, those students that haven't seriously thought about transitioning out, and are late to the game, are going to have problems. The best news is that we see almost all regions doing very, very well, and that will take me to my next slide if it comes up here. Where is it? This is our regional map. We divide employers into several different groups. One, we look at those that hire globally, that they're global hiring managers throughout the United States and worldwide, and they're up 6%. The U.S. employers are ones that recruit throughout the U.S. and are not geographically specific. And then the ones that are colored there, the regions, and then we break this country into regions like this. These are employers that specifically recruit only in those regions or those states within those regions. And as you can see, every region except the Northwest is pretty positive, and significantly so. And for those of us in the Great Lakes, this is the second year of double digits. I will say that being from Michigan, it's good to see that in Michigan and Ohio we're seeing some positive growth. Part of it, yes, it's due to the auto companies recovering, but underneath that, with auto companies having to take a back seat, we've seen a profound attention and growth on small companies that we usually don't think about in the Midwest, and they're doing very, very well. And so the region, this time we just see a lot of regional growth. The Mid-Atlantic is bifurcated too. The Virginia, Maryland, D.C. area is very, very positive. Where we've seen the slowdown is in the New York area compared to last year. I think it may be still due to the banks. I'm not. New York City is going through a shift from being a financial center to a high-end professional service sector. So, and high-end professional service sector doesn't recruit as many numbers, but I'm not sure that's all of it. But we just see the upper part of that region a little slower than the bottom part in specifics. So then the next thing we want to talk about is, I go back to my image of my lava lamp. You saw last year we had the two bubbles. We don't have the bubbles this year. In fact, you can look at the bottom. It's really merged up and out. And so this year's labor market is maybe not as spectacular number-wise and doesn't give me as many thrilling stories to tell, but it's deeper and it's broader and it's solider than last year. This one does have legs. I think it bodes well for the future, and particularly if we don't get slammed in the economy. It doesn't look like it's imminent that we're going to get a slam unless Europe really goes down the tubes. But this is a good feeling. I mean, this is positive. Let's see if I can get this next one up. Where are we? Go. Okay. Sectors, I want to point out something we don't think about. One of the best sectors, if you take it out, not just from the ag sector, the production ag service sector, but you take out food processing, you take out financial institutions oriented towards ag, you take out ag research, and you put them in one total ag system. That is one of the most consistently strongest sectors right now. There's a lack of supply in key ag sciences, nutritional science, diet, and things like that feed into that. This sector is doing very well. Might surprise you, but retail is on a rebound, and this is not just short-term hires. This is managerial training positions. They saw some growth last year. They're seeing pretty strong growth this year, and so they're bouncing back from some terrible years a couple years ago. Information services. I've been working at IBM and have been out in Silicon Valley and talking to people. And through some colleagues out there, we did get many more information service types of companies in their network this year than I've ever had before, and that helps because a lot of students want to work for some of those companies like Google and Facebook. And actually, if you get away from publishing, motion picture broadcasting is kind of iffy, and telecommunications, the information sector is doing very, very well. I mean, this is the web providers, the web and the network content providers. Now, you got to realize when they do really well, they don't hire big numbers, but there is a lot of spin-off in them. Professional services continues strong. Last year, it was led by IT, just a huge surge in need for IT. I think the people are more realistic this year that there's not that many IT grads out there, but engineering bounced back a bit. We can still see scientific services doing well. The only one really negative area in professional services is legal services. And now we're seeing health bounce back. I mean, you always have to wait and see with health. In a downturn economy, they get cost conscious. There's a lot of uncertainty about healthcare reform, but in particular, the hospitals are back hiring. The only trouble we see is in government, and it's probably headed towards the feds. I mean, the feds have covered that sector for a while. It may be because of budget issues and things that we'll see some limitations put on hiring in the feds. Okay, everybody wants to know about majors and what majors in play. I just got off a report from a reporter, a student reporter at Columbia, and actually one at our school, and I tell them that all majors are marketable, right? It just depends. There's a big if the students understand what they bring to the table and they have the skills and competencies that employers want, and that's a big if. All players is still the major dominant major that people look for. A lot of employers will consider all majors that and we're looking for skills and competencies that fit our business. This is not a code word for the liberal arts. This is truly all majors, and it depends on where they're at. Now, we have our usual suspects. Accounting's doing well. Engineering is doing much better than it's had the last couple of years. And computer science is probably all gone by now. Supply chain and finance continue strong. But the real stars of this might surprise you. We don't always associate them with the economy. But when you aggregate marketing, advertising, PR, and then you throw in a dash of what sales positions, that probably is one group that is really, really strong if they have the right skills and for what employers want. There's a heavy emphasis on marketing and sales right now coming out of this recession, and branding is a big name of the game now, and since a lot of it's done on internet and different forms, marketing and advertising and becomes an early asset, sometimes over highly technical grads. Human resources has bounced back. Human resources staffs are being beefed up, maybe a precursor of stronger hiring. Information systems in its broadest definition now. There's information system in business. There's computer information systems. There's different forms of information systems. But information management as a skill set, and there's a lot of majors that can lead into that. And math and statistics are two of them. This is a dominant theme among many employers. We need people that can understand how to take data, manage it, and turn it into information systems that we can use in an organization. That does bring us to the liberal arts. The liberal arts is, if you look at YouTube and any of the press, you'd think that they've fallen off the face of the earth. It's nothing new, but it seems to be perilous this time. I do have a paper I'm working on right now about a little bit about the liberal arts. I will be doing a study with employers here in 3 weeks on liberal arts, in particular, and getting ready for a big national conference to be held at Wake Forest in early April about redefining success for liberal arts. This has not lost the attention on anybody. I think the liberal arts is an excellent degree if cast in the right way, and they have the skill sets that employers want. The problem is, as we know, is that liberal arts students don't know how to translate what they do in their liberal arts environment into a work environment, and that's their biggest shortcoming. But we'll have more on the liberal arts, a lot of it, over the next 6 months. The next slide is about timing. If you remember when I started, I told you that the time was up. Timing was critical last year because they were over so fast. This time, a lot of employers got in early. They want to be done by recruiting. I will tell you that they didn't meet their hiring targets. We're seeing them spill over into this year, and we do have a healthy group that expect to be hiring in spring. So you're going to see, on the college side, you're going to see much more activity for full-time hiring this second part of the year, and employers will have to be aware that it's going to be competitive because a lot of you are targeting the same people, but it is going to be competitive. Now, the salaries are holding the line. We see a few more employers increasing salaries slightly, but we still see employers holding the line. There's nothing in the economy that would suggest that impel employers right at this moment yet to increase salaries significantly. There's some activity going on out there that will probably force salaries up. One of them is that bonuses are back, even though a small number of employers use them. Once that gets out there, all the students will start saying, where's my bonus? And as employers begin to compete for the same students and trying to entice them with salaries, that will make its way quickly through the student networks. And so all employers are going to have to push their salaries up in time. We have another report that's coming out. It's a detailed report on salary. It's cut out by sector, by size, by academic major. It's by region, and it's crossed in several different ways. My student just notified me that it's almost ready. It will be on our website at any time, and so it's a pretty detailed report. We have, almost 3,500 employers providing salary information. So we do have, we think, some reliable ranges that should be realistic for what employers are offering that they can compare, and by region. And so that brings us, we're halfway. What's the evaluation? Ball was fast and aggressive. There's been a lot of circling of companies around the same talent pool, which doesn't always bode well. And I told you bonuses are creeping in. Spring is going to be promising. I've already referred to that. I think I'm seeing more and more smaller companies indicating to me that they're going to play down. We're going to see a lot of internship hiring again. We see moving beyond uncertainty. Manpower predicted this. Actually, as much as we're hyped, and I know some employers are heavily involved in this, but politics aren't going to affect the job market. The levers they're going to push just won't do it for jobs. And despite that, again, it just came out last week, 47% of CEOs expect to hire in the next 6 months. That's actually very good to have about half your CEOs saying they're hiring at any given time is important. But we still want jobs. This is still an economy that wants jobs. It's a talk. Everybody's talking about it. And we have a big disconnect here. One, there's 4 parts to why we have a disconnect on jobs. And one of these is that it all depends on consumer spending. The more consumers spend, the more we generate service jobs to handle that, and the more we produce. We have spending constraints. It's going to last a long time. Behaviors are changing. We had an abnormally high focus on consumer side of the economy when you caught in the housing market in 2008 when this all crashed. It was up about 72.3%. That's off historically normal highs of about 60 to 62%. So we're going to pull back 10%, and we don't have much of the production side of the economy to fill in that gap yet. So it's going to take a long time, and it's just to get, and consumers just don't have anywhere to pull large amounts of cash from. The second thing is we're having a very structural realignment of labor, how we use labor, where it's positioned. This doesn't have anything to do yet with outsourcing, though that will come into play at some point. But we're seeing a lot jobs being aligned to technology, and then technology will dictate the jobs rather than the other way around. We're seeing, I've been involved with companies that are really in this downturn auditing how many jobs do I really, really need, and we're looking at boomers leaving, and do we need to replace every one of them? And most of the companies I'm working with, they're only planning to actually replace 50 to 60% of the boomers. So this idea that we're going to get 100% boomer replacement may not happen, but technologies in law and in medical technology and other areas are really taking a different look at how we organize and allocate and position labor in a global economy. There will be outsourcing, but most of the things you read about today, like in this morning's paper, was about Facebook and the jobs are going to add, but it was even going to be in China. Well, realize that their businesses are in China. They're hiring in China for China markets. Their growth in the U.S. markets is pretty mature, so they're going to not add for U.S. markets at the same pace. These are global companies, and they're not outsourcing jobs. They're just not creating jobs here, but they're probably the total part. And then there's a real problem still with skills and skill gap, not only for college students, but for the workers that are out of place. And the longer they're out of the workforce, regardless of what kind of degree level they have, we have engineers out of the labor force, they're going to have a hard time getting back in. And then the last part of it is uncertainty. Job creation is based on uncertainty. We also have this unfortunate measure that is short-run, meeting quarterly Wall Street expectations for some companies is a paramount. I really appreciate companies like Google that stand up and say, we're not going to do that. We have to hire people. But a lot of companies that don't meet Wall Street expectations, the first thing they'll do is cut labor because that's what they control. So we have all these dynamics playing out. It's changed the landscape of labor. Most of the politicians are still thinking of labor much like it was organized in the 60s and 70s, and it's not there. So no matter what they do, it's probably not going to help very much in the short run. It's going to take a whole new way to do this. Okay, I need to move on because I promised I'd be finished here. I didn't get through a lot of this, but let's see if I can get. So the skills are in the issue. I will going to skip right through this because I was going to talk about some work by Peter Capelli. But let me talk about the transition from college to work. This is a typical picture of what happens in the transition from college to work. When I graduated back in the 60s, it was going from college on the left-hand side to work on the right-hand side was just a stretch. I could go into the workplace. It was nice and flat on the other side, stayed in our jobs 5 to 7 years, learned about the workplace, learned about the skills that we needed to have, and adapted our learning. And on the left-hand side, I didn't have to have an internship. There were very few people that had internships in the 60s, even into the 70s. It didn't become, and even by the 80s, it was only about 35 to 40%, and mostly congregated in engineering by that time. And then you could see that about 5-7 years, it starts to rise in the background and rise. But today's college market looks something like, transition looks like something like this. It's in free fall, and it's a physical challenge because not only are they jumping and not quite sure where they're going to land on the other side. Right at the moment, the other side is more like shale and slips out from underneath them because of the labor market. But what's really distorted in this picture is they should be jumping the other way because the expectations of employers on what they need to be able to do when they hit the ground is much higher than 10 years ago. Now, there was a lot of questions about the skill gap. I refer you to these 12 essentials. This is Michigan State's 12 essentials. These are what the Board of Trustees have adopted as the 12 core key essential competencies beyond just professional competency in their major, broader than that, that students need to be aware of. This next slide is the study that we recently filled also on which that separates certain sets of skills above the others. This is where you have to jump up. And these now are really, really critical competencies. Employers really are looking for. Some are different based on their economic sector, but I will tell you the top 7 are surging, and it's not in engineering and business. These are across all different types of economic sectors, and there's a paper there for you to do that. I will skip Peter Capelli if we have questions and answers because I need to wrap this up. And let me just go to the best methods for hiring. It's clear now that the top strategy for hiring is the internship. It's just soared over the decade. Only in 2000, maybe 42% of employers total use it, higher obviously in manufacturing and places that are used to it, but now it's up to 66-68% of all employers. You get into some subsectors like manufacturing, it's up in the 70s. You come to certain parts of the country, it's almost expected. In the Midwest, in the Mid-Atlantic, it's almost expected that employers are going to have internships, and it's a way that they're integrating students into the workplace. Actually, with some changes in the survey, one of the second method, you might find this interesting, is I separated out something. It's alumni within a company with relationships back to the schools that they're targeting. They're now the super agent. They're there to work and help identify students with faculty and contacts back at the university. They represent the company. We separate that out. It has really become it's becoming a very crucial recruiting strategy, particularly as employers try to target talent earlier. Career fairs still are important, and they will be for full-time hires because these companies are cranking up. They have to crank up so fast. They'll come back to career fairs. But I want to tell everybody that where we see the real correlation with career fairs, it's with internship hiring. It's almost 10, 15 years ago, there was a perfect correlation between career fairs and full-time hiring. Now, career fair usage is not associated with full-time hiring. It's associated with internship hiring. A lot of questions on social media. We're past the tipping point. 36% of all companies now have adopted some form of early media. So we're now set for prime time. You're going to see more and more companies use this. If you're in the New York area, those companies in the New York area are more than 50% of them already use social media. I don't have a lot of work on this, but I want to direct you to two groups that do. Mary Scott's done a lot of work on what students feel about social media, and her work is excellent to tell you the right things to do and the wrong things to do. So her work is available. I think you just have to Google Mary Scott and it should come up. TMP in New York is the advertising company. They do a lot of social media work and recruiting, and they have on their website some suggestions. And I just encourage you to, if you want to hear about strategies that work and don't work, these are the two sources to go to. Again, I just want to say, presently in this survey, 68 to 70% of all employers are seeking interns. There was over 55,000 intern positions that were internship managers that they were looking for. And that doesn't include everybody that said a lot, or I'll be recruiting interns all year. We're just endlessly recruiting interns. I want to point that out. We're going to have a lot of reports on this. I'm going to skip this. There's a lot of issues about internships. I've got some papers already out there on internships at high-stake events. I've got internships, the unpaid internship situation. I've got one coming out on internships and credit, and what does that mean? We've got I've got a lot of work coming out on this, and that's free. There's a paper for employers out there on what makes a good internship from a study. That's another, we're updating that paper. So that's out there. But what it gets down to is employers are looking for students with experience. They don't care if it's unpaid or paid. They don't care if it's for credit or non-credit. They want students with relevant work experiences, and we have much more information in this year's study on that, and will be coming out soon. So, Janet, I'm probably way beyond, but I just want to point out these other, what counts, the size of the bubbles to employers count. I know out there's a number of colleges saying, yep, studying abroad is important on campus. Civic engagement is important on campus. Leadership, these smaller things that employers don't weigh much, and I do this every possible way, and it always comes out the same. And the bottom line here is we all know any one of these experiences can be a significant factor in a student getting a job or being well positioned to get a job. The problem with the ones at the tail end is the students don't know how to relate that to an employer, and that's why the employers discount them. I can go on more of that later. So I think the last thing I'll talk about here, and I won't get into the dating game unless it comes up in answers, is this. Some people ask me how vulnerable people are. We kind of follow this. The good news in this report is that the vulnerability of young adults from the ages of 20 to 28 is greatly reduced. And it used to be, the remark was terrible. It's down to 40% from a high of 70% 2 years ago. On the other end, though, we're seeing a creep up in the vulnerability of those over the age of 50. I don't deal in that labor market very well, and so I don't see a lot of it, but it's out there. Anyway, so that's what's going on. Let's stop here because I've run out of time, way beyond time. I apologize. And let's open it up for any other questions you may have. You missed my point about college is a dating, but it may come up in some of the questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Phil. Sorry again for the technical difficulties that we had earlier. So we've had so many questions submitted prior to the webinar and then also on the webinar itself. Obviously in the time that's left, we won't have a chance to get through that all, but we'll try to do some follow-up with each of you afterwards. Again, we will be sending you Phil's materials as a follow-up to the webinar, so you have that. But just a few questions maybe we have time for, Phil. So here's an example of what we're hearing. Employers developing internships or co-op, how many of those employers are developing them with the intent of hiring or converting those interns? And do you have a sense of what that conversion rate looks like?
Yeah, I do, and that's going to come out in one of those reports that I promise we have a lot more information on. I would say that there's two groups of employers. There's a small group of employers that are offering increasing numbers of internships, and they do it for the profession. So we see a lot in the hospitals, and we see education. They're not going to hire those people, but they feel it's a professional responsibility to make sure that they provide opportunities to the local schools that are producing those kind of graduates to make sure that they're well trained. On the other hand, the vast majority of employers are building out internship and co-op programs to develop a pipeline of talent. We're seeing huge increases in small employers. In between, there's a small number of gray areas that we seem to pick up in the media that are abusing internships significantly, and it's unfortunate. It happens every time we have a downturn in the economy. When things pick up and students aren't as desperate for opportunities, and as this expanded internship market expands, those people either have to become legitimate or will drop out. But I believe truly from all the work I do on employer side on internships, the majority of employers I work for, this is a talent management pool. The only problem that comes up is if the economy turns bad like it has and they can't hire them. It's beyond the control of the internship, but they're building internship programs to have a talent pool when this economy turns around that they can tap into quickly.
Great, thank you. So another question. This one actually comes from an employer, and it says, how do we create awareness of companies with students in an efficient way to attract them to our industry?
Yeah, this is a long-standing question. I don't know if I can even really address it. I mean, but this is a serious thing. what we're having is everybody's trying to brand, and we're almost doing it to brand dilution. And there's some articles about what happens when you get to that point, and students are overwhelmed with it. But what students want to see is, one, consistency. Are you there when you say you're going to be there? They want it. We're finding, interesting enough, that they want to start early making a relationship with you, not in the pre-dating phase on Facebook. They're when they get to campus. Let me just give an example. Some of our students went to a couple of our people and said, can we have a session just so we can meet some employers and figure out what it's all about? So they set up a breakfast, and they invited what they call mature freshmen and early sophomores to just come, and they had 20 employers, and they had a breakfast, and they sat around, and then each employer had 5 students at a table, and they just talked about what they did, and then the students got to go to another table and talk to different employers just about what it was they did, what work was like. What they didn't expect, and some brought resumes, they weren't very good, but what they didn't expect was all of a sudden the connection that they made with employers starting saying, you're really mature enough to go to work. How would you like to, think about having a summer experience? And one of my friends from a Fortune 50 company I won't tell you about was really excited about his student, but he didn't have a very good resume, and he said that we can't hire, I have to call back because they would never hire anybody with a resume like this. He stepped out of the room, called back. By the time he came back, this person already had a summer internship with another company and already had an internship for their junior year. And what's happened is these kind of events match people up. They're out of interview sessions. There's less stress. There's more communication. All of a sudden, connections are made. And by the end of the day, almost every one of those students had an internship. This is the kind of thing that students are looking for: genuine consistency. They don't look for the big gorilla at the career fair that brings in the NASCAR. It might be cool to some of them, but they're looking for genuine people, and that's all I can say is your branding is genuine, your follow-up is genuine. If you give them, believe it or not, they're looking for a career advice. Nothing against career service people, but what is it like in your company? What would I make in careers? And you know what? We found in work with employers don't want to give that information because they think if they do, they won't come with the company. So we're miscommunicating here. I'm rambling. This is a much bigger problem than I can address, but you're right on. There's a lot of people trying to figure out what is the best way to make connections as employers push earlier and earlier and earlier. And the nice thing is I think students are receptive in the right venues.
So, Phil, one last question. This one comes from a school. Universities focus on resumes. Employers focus on skills. What approaches should a university take to become more skill-focused?
Well, I guess I know I could be flippant and say read my stuff, but you're absolutely right. I mean, except for a few majors like accounting and those that like nursing that have to be accredited and are tested and teach. I mean, most employers assume that whatever major a student has, they have mastery of it. And now tell me what else you can do. And if your resume is not a skill-based resume, and the students can't discuss what they did, you're behind. So what schools have to understand, like Michigan State did, we had to adopt that these 12 essentials were critical and make sure the faculty were on the board of trustees, and I will tell you what happened was the Writing Center saw this, and they took over the 12 essentials, and they've embedded it into their into freshman writing. So they every one of in a freshman writing course, the student may be having to write about 1 or 2 or 3 of what it means to have those competencies. And the Writing Center is also taking over the resume. It's helping to take over resume writing as part of that experience to free up time. So you have to build allies. You have to say these skills are important, and this is where I run into the most problems. Is faculty don't recognize. That's why I'm out at Boise. We're working on ways to educate. What are these skill sets beyond what you teach them in the classroom that are critically important that employers want that we're not fulfilling the gap? And that's what I spend a lot of time around the country talking about. So it's educating faculty, getting key players involved in the campus to bless that these skill-based competencies are really important, and we're going to embed them in what we do. And, from career services, you just can't do it yourself. You're going to have to, align yourself, find some allies, and make the information you acquire have to go to decision makers saying, look, this is critical. And so faculty have to say, okay, we're part of this and we have to address it. That's hard. It's hard.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I think we could go on all day asking you questions, given all the response that we got this afternoon. But given the time, I think we're going to go ahead and close this webinar down. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. And again, Phil, thank you so much for once again sharing your insights on what's coming in college recruiting. It was invaluable. And then as a note, we will be sending you a copy of the materials as a follow-up for the webinar. So thank you all, and have a great day.